Welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. My sister and I were driving behind a pickup truck on a two-lane road. I remember thinking it looked like Trevor's truck from GTA 5, Random Habit. He's my favorite character. The truck came to a slow down to turn left, blinker on, and about halfway through there was what sounded like a giant explosion. We thought a tire must have popped. My car got hit by some debris, so we pulled over to wait for cops. While waiting, my sister observed the scene and said she thought it was a hit and run because the red truck was nowhere to be seen. Cops came to our car eventually and told us the truck had hit a motorcycle. This part also confuses me because I'm a pretty attentive driver and never heard or saw a motorcycle until the crash, but I can accept that maybe I just missed it. The really confusing part is when my sister curiously asked the cop if the driver of the truck was still here, and he said yes and pointed to a navy blue pickup truck. Same exact model, just blue. Both me and my sister were pretty confused, but we just gave our statement and moved on. However, I still think about it. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? Did we both hallucinate the color? Story 2. I'm a writer, small-time, stubborn, the sort who treats tattered paperbacks like reliquaries. My copy of Stephen King's On Writing is older than most of my friendships. I bought it in college, the spine broken in a way that makes it fit my hand like a familiar joke. I never write in my books. It's a rule I picked up somewhere between cheap apartments and late-night drafts. Marginalia feels like sacrilege, like annotating a sacred space. Yesterday evening I was texting a friend, an old workshop buddy who still enjoys arguing about commas at 1 a.m., and we got into a discussion about craft, habits, and the stupid little lines that kick you awake at 3 a.m. I quoted something from On Writing, but my memory was fuzzy on the phrasing. Instead of admitting defeat, I walked to the bookshelf, pulled the book down, and found the page. The margins were blank, the paper soft from years of thumbs. I read the paragraph twice, muttered the line into my phone, and left the book open on the coffee table. I went to the kitchen to get a drink. It's a tiny walk, 20 steps, if you count the deeder for the recycling bin. I was gone maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds is nothing. 90 seconds is the time it takes to put a kettle on, or to rehearse an opening sentence in your head. When I came back, the book was gone. Not misplaced on the shelf, not flopped on the rug, not shoved under the couch where everything goes to die. The apartment is small enough that gone really means gone. I live alone. I turned the place inside out like I was trying to find a missing cat. Cushions stripped, magazines upended, a careful excavation under the couch cushions that yielded nothing but lint and an old grocery list. The windows were locked from the inside. The deadbolt clicked. No one had come in. No one had been here. Frustration curdled into something thinner and sharper. I told myself I'd been careless, that maybe I'd put it on the kitchen counter. I told myself it would turn up in a calm, boring place. To clear my head and my hands, I left for a walk. The neighborhood sun was the same as it had been the day before. People walked dogs in the same tired loops. The barista at the corner place called my name like she always does. I tried to breathe in rhythm, to think about the mundane, rent, groceries, a paragraph I'd been failing to finish all week. The absurdity of the missing book lodged itself like a splinter behind jokes about ghosts. An hour later I came back. The living room looked like it always does. The lamp shrugged awake, a half-empty mug on the end table, a plant doing its best but losing. And there, sitting perfectly centered on the coffee table, closed and immaculate, was the book. My heart did something I can only describe as a full-body lurch. I reached for it with a ridiculous, reverent caution, like I was approaching a landmine. I opened the cover. The book fell open to the same page where I'd left it. My paragraph, the same sentence, the same crease in the margin where my thumb had rested. And written in blue pen in the margin, in handwriting almost identical to mine, were 3 words. You already know this. I don't write in my books. Ever. Not even a small underlining. Not even a stray exclamation mark on a sentence that hit me like a train. My handwriting is a nervous thing, slanted little loops, impatient tails on my Ys. To look at the note was to look at my own handwriting reflected in a window. It shouldn't have been mine, because I had left the book open and walked away. I had not written the words. No one else has a key. No one else has access. For a long minute, maybe longer, I stood there and tried every rational explanation like someone testing keys in a lock. Sleepwalking? I don't sleepwalk. A prank? My social circle is dry, not malicious. A psychotic break? Lovely, but my thoughts felt lucid and precise, not scrambled. A really elaborate coincidence? The handwriting matched too well. I did the things people do when confronted with the uncanny. I photographed the margin, I touched the ink, it had that freshly dry sheen. I checked the pen jar on my desk, no blue pen missing, and I opened my notes app to see if I'd typed the line and somehow printed it, some bureaucratic glitch of the brain. Nothing added up. It's not just the note. It's the tone of it. You already know this felt less like a message and more like a mirror held up to something in me. It was patient and wry, the voice of someone who had watched me flounder in a paragraph, and then sighed because I'd wasted time looking outward for what was already inside. It was intimate enough to unnerve me. I slept poorly. Every creak in the building sounded like a book sliding across a coffee table. I kept imagining the tiny blue letters migrating across the page, forming sentences I'd be too afraid to read in the morning. In daylight, the irrationality is less comfortable. How do you live with a small, private evidence of something you can't explain? How do you process the fact that your own handwriting has something to tell you, in your own margin, about the thing you've been trying to wrestle into a sentence for years? I don't know what I want from you. An explanation? Reassurance? A collective denial that I'm becoming less real? Mostly, I wanted to get it out of my head and onto the page. Maybe telling the story is a way to prove to myself that the world still obeys cause and effect. Maybe it's just another line to tuck into the margin of my life. Story 3. Last October still plays through my head like a scratched record, the edges of it clear, the middle a smear. I had a business meeting downtown that ran longer than it should have, the kind of meeting that eats minutes in polite small talk and leaves you sprinting for the next thing. I was cutting it close for the 3 p.m. ferry from Schwartz Bay to Tawasin. The drive from downtown to the terminal usually takes 30 to 40 minutes depending on traffic, and by the time I left I felt the familiar, rising tightness behind my sternum that comes with the knowledge you're about to run against a hard deadline. Driving anxiety is its own small theater for me. To quiet it, I have rituals, a clean notebook in the passenger seat, a thermos with 2 week coffee, and an absurdly specific playlist of Byzantine hymns I put on when I want something that will hold my hands and slow my breath. There's one I love, Aini Parthene, a version about 8 minutes long, voices folding over each other like tapestries. The harmonies pull me inward. They make intersections feel gentler, stoplights less like edicts. I remember getting into the car, the door shutting with a familiar click, the city's late afternoon light gilding the buildings. I remember the first phrase of the hymn, the low vowels, how the sound sat behind my teeth. I remember thinking, not unkindly, that if I drove like a calm person for once maybe the world would oblige. And then nothing. Not quite nothing, but a missing reel. The next thing I know I am at the ferry gate. The attendant asks for my reservation. My heart ricochets as if it's been jump-started. The hymn is winding down in a wash of voices as I pull up to the booth. The dashboard clock says something that should have been impossible. I have no memory of the drive. No recollection of merging onto the highway, of braking for the stretch where the road narrows, of calculating the gaps between semis. All the stuff of driving that usually fills my head the whole way. It felt like I blinked and was there. When you tell friends they say things like highway hypnosis or autopilot. Other people say time slip with a theatrical shrug, the sort of shrug that places you somewhere between mystic and mad. I tried to inventory rational explanations right there in the parking lane. I hadn't fallen asleep. I'm not that tired. I wasn't on my phone. The playlist was on. I could still hear the last choral phrase as if the universe had kept the soundtrack for me. The distance between downtown and Schwartz Bay simply could not be collapsed into 10 minutes under any legal speed limit I could possibly have observed. Yet my conscious mind provided no footage of the route, only the opening and closing frames. I am used to being in my head. That's the nature of being a writer. I narrate in real time, soundtrack the mundane with voices and adjectives. Maybe that's why this absence stings. A writer without narrative is like a painter without color. For a terrifying 10-minute stretch, my interior voice had gone quiet. After the meeting, over the slow churn of the ferry and the fog of coffee, I tried to piece myself back together. I replayed the hymn in my mind, the way the altos held a note that seemed to bend time, the percussion of vowels that could have acted as a metronome for a brain wanting to skip. Was it the music? Was the ritual so effective at soothing my anxiety that my body drove on constellations, operated by muscle memory and the deep map of routes I've taken thousands of times? Or was something stranger happening, a brief dissociative drift where my conscious self unclipped from sensorium to protect me from the stress? You don't have to be dramatic to be unsettled. The practicalities keep edging in. What if I'm losing something I didn't know I could lose, like the steady thread between intention and action? What about sleep? Stress? Medication? Hormones? The mind is a ledger of small things that add up to big differences. Or maybe it was just a piece of ordinary human fallibility dressed up in spiritual robes because I had ritual music on and a deadline in the periphery. I told a few people and listened to their versions of the story. The skeptic in me liked highway hypnosis and autopilot brain. The other part of me, the part that keeps an eye on the uncanny, liked the poetry of it, arriving as if exhaled into place, the hymn a gentle bridge the way some people find in prayer. Neither explanation felt complete. Since then I've started paying attention to the small redundancies in my life. How often I take the same lanes, the comfort of a familiar radio cue, the times my hands seem to know the steering wheel better than my thoughts do. I've also started leaving more white space in my schedule, the tiny buffer that would make being 10 minutes late an annoyance instead of an existential question. Has anyone else had time do this, collapse, skip, wink out, and then come back as if nothing happened? I think yes. I think we all occasionally find ourselves as passengers in our own lives. But that day, the hymn and the missing minutes left a tiny, persistent unease, a reminder that even the most ordinary routines can harbor small mysteries. And for a writer, that's the sort of thing you tuck into the pocket of a story and keep checking, like a found coin that might tell you where you've been. Story 4. Back then I was itinerant by design, backpacking, sleeping in scrappy campsites, hitching rides and staying in the woods until I ran out of patience with the quiet. I found myself on Maui for about a month and a half, which felt like the exact amount of time you can ask of an island before it asks something back. January was wet and green, evenings thick with humidity and the kind of darkness that eats the horizon whole. I was camped out on a ridge outside a small town, the tent half smothered by ferns. The bus, always late and always the same tired bus, was my lifeline back to civilization when I wanted to resupply or just sit under fluorescent light for an hour and read. This was one of those pitch-black evenings. The island had already folded itself into a velvet cloak, and the jungle around the stop smelled of damp leaves and someone else's dinner. I got on and found a seat by the window. The bus's interior lights hummed and stung. They were the wrong kind of white, the fluorescent that flattens skin and thoughts alike. I could see my reflection in the glass, ghosted and tired, a camper in a hoodie with a backpack full of stories I hadn't yet sorted. At one stop a man climbed aboard. He had that classic deadhead look, older, soft-faced, a kind of permanent smile like he'd permanently misplaced a worry. He was wearing a Grateful Dead tee with the Bears, the colors a little faded but still absurdly cheerful. He moved with an easy, casual shamble, carrying a messenger bag that looked like it had been on tour since 1974. I glanced at him and then turned my attention back to the window. I was lost in other thoughts and the island's low, patient rhythm. The bus stopped again. For a moment I was elsewhere, thinking of where I'd pitched the tent that night, whether the grocery store would have the tuna I liked, whether the next stretch of trail would be muddy. Then, out of habit, I looked up. The same man was stepping onto the bus through the front door. Weird, I thought, and let it slide. Maybe he'd missed his stop earlier and had to double back. A little while later, when the bus stopped and I glanced up again, there he was, same shirt, same patient smile, same nonchalant gait, climbing in through the same front entrance. By the third or fourth time it happened, the weirdness stopped being funny and started being small and precise, like the edge of a paper cut. My first sensible theory was something like prankster energy, a guy running to the next stop and hopping back on, like a performance. But this was Maui, not a college campus, and the distances between stops didn't add up to a sprint-able prank. He never seemed out of breath. If anything, he appeared to be existing in a gentler time signature than the rest of us, arriving each time as if he'd been waiting just out of frame, like someone stepping through a curtain. I watched him with the half-curiosity and half-resignation of someone who has been traveling on small budgets for too long. There were other people on the bus, locals and a couple of other travelers, and they didn't register him the way I did. He didn't make a spectacle. He didn't laugh or wink or indulge my observation. He simply sat down or stood or leaned on the pole, and the bus moved on. There are details that stubbornly stick with me. The fluorescent light giving his shirt a ghostly glow, the way the bus smelled like rubber and coconut-scented shampoo, the faint clink of a bus chain on a pause, the murmur of other passengers saying ordinary things. He had a small scar on his left knuckle that looked like a life story in miniature, and he kept tucking a stray curl under his ear with the same absent movement as if marking time. Once, when the bus stopped and I looked up, he'd be boarding. The next stop, boarding again. The exit would have been behind me, so I never saw him leave. I was neither brave nor impolite enough to follow, and frankly I was tired and preoccupied with the small, practical tasks travel demands. I never saw another copy of him. The bus didn't accumulate a parade of deadheads. There was just this one man recapitulating his entrance in a way that unsettled the map of normalcy in me. I half-formed a dozen explanations. Maybe he had a loop of errands and lived near the route, getting off and making a tiny circuit on foot between stops. Maybe the island's topography allowed him to dash across a side street and make it back before breath showed. Maybe he had companions waiting just off-screen, playing a gentle joke. Maybe, and here the mind opens up to the deliciously ridiculous, there was a kind of glitch in the night where the same soul was drawn to the same portal, stepping through as if the bus were a doorway and he, some patient pilgrim, kept finding it. Story 5. I left the house at 5 a.m., half asleep and clavicle deep in autopilot. Keys, bag, coffee-stiffened brain. The day stretched and blurred, meetings, errands, the usual fluorescent-lit hustle, and I didn't get home until 8 p.m. It was dark when I opened the door, the apartment smelling like the faint lemon of dish soap and something I'd left simmering in the morning. Before I could settle, there was a knock, my mom, breathless from her walk, saying the tenants had found my small jewelry bag on the lawn and dropped it in the mailbox for safekeeping. "We were out on our walk," she said. "They left it there." I felt an odd double tug, relief that nothing obviously valuable was missing, and a peculiar, queasy awareness that I had zero memory of ever taking the bag outside. The jewelry bag sits on my vanity. I don't open it much. I haven't gone into it since Sunday. I can't swear whether it had been on the vanity all day, and I simply didn't notice, or if I really had carried it out with my work bag in the pre-dawn fog of my own foggy head. My mom has a history, the small, boundary-crossing habit of rifling through things out of a practical, nosy love. She could have moved it, but why would she stage such a story? Nothing's missing, which only deepens the mystery. There are a few ways this could have played out that aren't sinister. 5 a.m. departures are prime time for absent-mindedness. You can put things in pockets, set a bag down on the lawn while juggling keys and mail, and walk away convinced you've locked the door when you actually slipped the jewelry into your tote and left it out. Sleep deprivation makes our brains form plausible memories to fill gaps, that nagging did I or didn't I sensation. There's also sleepwalking or simple dissociation. Your body can move while your conscious mind takes a break. Or your mom, in a well-meaning but invasive flourish, could have moved the bag and invented a story that made sense in the moment. Practical things to do that might help settle this and stop the internal gaslighting. Ask the tenants exactly when they found the bag and where on the lawn, time, approximate location, whether there were footprints or if it looked freshly placed. Check any exterior cameras or doorbell footage. Even neighbor cameras occasionally catch small movements. Ask your mom calmly if she opened your bag or remembers seeing it earlier. Normalizing the question makes the truth easier to offer. Look for tiny clues, grass blades, dew, dirt, or a faint scent on the bag that suggests it really had been outside. Check your pockets, your car, or the door area for crumbs of evidence. Story 6. This one is seemingly insignificant, but it is truly the kind of stuff I live for and love experiencing, but things like this rarely happen to me, so I figured I would share. So I bought some items at a local Dollar General, and upon receiving the change from the cashier, I noticed a strange penny. I'm a sucker for rare coins, and it turns out this was a 1902 Indian head penny. Not super rare per se, but I've never had one, so I was pretty excited and set it aside for safekeeping. When I got to my house after leaving the store, I did something with the penny. The reason I say something is because I truly could not remember where I put it. This will make sense in a minute. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and the penny was put to the back of my mind. The next day I woke up, went and fed my cats, and went to a friend's house for a few hours. Whenever I returned home, I started my usual routine of weekend cleaning. I started a load of clothes, I vacuumed my room, and I made my bed. The making my bed part is important because this is where it gets super weird. So after I got finished vacuuming, I started to dust my surfaces and suddenly remembered my penny. I had wanted to place it on my display table for my selected items, shark teeth, gemstones, feathers, rare coins, but I could not remember for the life of me where I put the penny. I began to worry that I left the penny in my clothes that I washed, and it was lost to the dryer gods, or worse, accidentally vacuumed it. I started to search all of my drawers, normal places I put my rare items, nothing. I began to retrace my steps coming home from the store, and I figured I must have accidentally dropped it at my friend's house. I was about to give him a call when I noticed something right on top of my freshly made bed. The penny was sitting directly in the middle of my bed, on top of the covers. It didn't make any sense. I had thoroughly cleaned my room, and in the process of making my bed, I always pull all of the blankets and sheets all the way off, shake them out well, and layer them back in their proper order. The truly surprising fact was that it was seemingly suspended in some quasi-Schrodinger's penny situation where it didn't exist until I began to search for it, at which point it materialized directly on top of my bed in the most obvious spot. I literally laughed and made a point to commit the whole situation to memory. It was a subtle but personally significant situation that really made me reinvigorated in my quest for understanding of the universe. Just thought I would share this little experience, and if anyone else has had similar experiences, please feel free to share with the class. Story 7. I think about this story often. I like to blame the fact that it was dark that night, and I was so angry I must have gotten confused. I moved in with my boyfriend in 2023. We lived in a nice elderly couple's basement. Although the basement was pretty dingy, it was nice to be away from my abusive mother. My boyfriend and I argued a lot. We moved in together really fast in our defense. We're fine now. One night we argued and I left. I suffer from BPD, and leaving to clear my mind is the best option sometimes to avoid escalation. It was late, but not that late, maybe around 8 p.m. We lived in a suburb, houses everywhere. I felt safe. I grew up in the projects, so living around houses felt nice for me. I was confident I'd be fine. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but a lot nicer than what I was used to. I walked for a while trying to calm myself. I walked and walked. All recognizable. I passed houses that were landmarks for me. All things I've seen before. Because I didn't know the neighborhood that well, I tried to walk as straight as possible, so I easily knew how to get back. Soon I passed a grocery store, one I had never seen before. It was right on the corner of a cross-section. All of a sudden things started to look different. The houses got grander and large, so damn big. Elaborate large glass homes that were practically mansions. Christmas decor littered the streets. It was around September, a little early for Christmas decor. But nothing I hadn't seen before. I remembered it was September because I wasn't wearing a sweater and I was fine. I just had on a graphic tee. I walked more and more, and suddenly the streets branched out wider. My neighborhood was the suburbs, but wasn't by any means lavish. I was honestly so in awe of their homes, I walked and looked around. I remember a man jogged past me once. I looked into the homes and saw a woman just folding laundry, usual stuff. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Soon I walked, and I was suddenly near a lake. Gorgeous lakefront homes everywhere. The streets were completely empty except for that man that jogged past me earlier. I walked further, away from the lake, and turned on a dark block. All the street lights were off except one. I suddenly felt a little uneasy. The streetlights being off scared me. So I walked quicker. I turned around a little paranoid and noticed a younger kid behind me, maybe a preteen. He was also minding his own business. It was like nobody really noticed me. The kid was just standing there, not really doing anything. Here's the worst part. I don't remember how I got back. The last thing I remember is the streetlights. All I know is I must have kept walking and walking. The next thing I remember was being back in my own neighborhood, because I was suddenly in front of a house I did recognize. They played loud music while the whole family danced in the front yard. I smiled and walked past them back to my basement. I told my boyfriend about it a few days later. He had no idea what I was talking about. My boyfriend grew up in this neighborhood. He'd lived here all his life since he came to America. I told him to look for the grocery store one day when we were driving, and I couldn't find it. I even told him about the grand houses and the lake. He said there was none. Absolutely no bodies of water anywhere near this suburb. Not very scary, but it's something I think about. We just joke and say, I was so angry I must have walked really far and came back. In reality, I was only gone for about 30 minutes. I even opened my Google Maps looking for the nearest lake, couldn't find anything. Sorry if this is a little unnecessarily long, lol. This situation honestly confused me more than anything. Story 8. I travel back and forth across the country a lot. From West Coast to Midwest. Always go the same route. Stop at the same stops. Been doing so for a little over a decade. Leave at 10 a.m. from West Coast and arrive in the third day in the late afternoon, 5 to 7-ish each time. On one trip from west to east, I was a day-and-a-half drive away from my destination. Stopped at my usual gas station to fill up and call ahead and let people know I was on schedule. Got back in the vehicle and got back onto the interstate. A few minutes later I pass a sign that has the name of my destination on it, and my thought was, how have I made this trip this many times and never noticed there's another town with my town's name? A couple minutes past that sign, and I see off-ramps for a city ahead. My city. As this was the second day of a 3-day trip somehow, I gained more than 24 hours. I pulled into my destination, and my friends were shocked. I have no missing gap of memory. The phones showed I did place the call in Nebraska, and it was 40 minutes prior to me pulling into destination. Corroborated by friend's phone. The math says I would have to be driving over 300 miles per hour nonstop. Which obviously I wasn't. I have searched for an answer for a couple years now. Only thing I can find is about people missing or losing time. Even AI can't find me anything on gaining time. It happened once more, months later on a trip from east to west. There's a town sign that when I see it I know I have 2.5 hours to go and am done with the drive. I pass the sign, and not 5 minutes later I'm pulling into town. Again, no gaps in memory and no logical explanations. Hasn't happened since that trip. I've made this trip roughly 100 times or more. These instances are not the only illogical or improbable or impossible things I've witnessed. Hoping that someone has seen or heard of this before. Anyone with any thoughts as to what occurred would be helpful and appreciated. Story 9. So this actually happened last week. It just took me some time to come to terms with it. I got a phone call from my next-door neighbor late in the evening asking if I can help him move a mattress into his upstairs. His mom is ill and has a big heavy sleep number bed. I of course ran over to help because they're great neighbors. I get over there and his friend, who is also a priest, was there to help. I helped them figure out how to separate the mattress from the bed so we could fit it upstairs. We get it all moved up and back in place when my neighbor asks if I can help them move an armoire upstairs too. I think nothing of it, and we pull it out of his travel trailer and start bringing it up the front stairs of his house. This is where I died. The front stairs are 11 steps. I was on the lower end of the armoire about 6 steps up when my neighbor and his friend lose a handle on the armoire, and it comes crashing down on me, and I fall backwards towards the pavement. I then wake up in my dining room to my phone ringing, and my wife asking me if I'm going to answer the phone. It's my neighbor asking me if I can help move a bed upstairs for his mom. I go over there and meet his priest friend again, as this has been the first time I met him. I say I can help with the bed, but I cannot help with the armoire. My neighbor was like, "How'd you know about the armoire?" I then proceeded to tell them, I'm pretty sure I just died. I spent the next hour talking with the priest. He had so many questions. My neighbor didn't believe it until I described the upstairs bedroom in perfect detail down to the metal mattress frame on the floor and the intricate headboard leaning against the wall, and I had never been upstairs in their house before. The priest asked me what I saw after I died. I told him I never actually died. Before it happened, I woke up at my dining room table. Story 10. For a few weeks before this, while out driving, I've observed pedestrians standing at the traffic lights who will reach into their pocket and look at their phone as they're walking across the road when the light goes green. Nothing significant or strange about this, just one of those mundane things you notice while going about your day. Today I was driving with my daughter, and we stopped at a red light at a crossing, and there was a man standing there. Nothing out of the ordinary, denim jacket, black cap, glasses, around 6 square feet. I thought I'd try to weird out my young daughter. She's 5, so I knew I was going to blow her damn mind. So I said, "See that man? When the walking man goes green and he starts to walk across, he'll reach into his pocket and pull out his phone and start looking at it. Watch and see." As he walks across, he reaches into his pocket, but then immediately takes his hand out and looks and points right at me with his mouth open, smiling like a gotcha stance. Of course my daughter found this absolutely hilarious, and I sat there completely mind blown. I must have sat there in silence looking at him walk across for the next 10 seconds. I drove on and had a look at him as I drove past, and he was smirking/laughing. I've been playing it through my head all day. The windows were up. The radio was on. I wasn't shouting. My voice was not even remotely raised. He must have been about 15 to 20 feet away from me. I can't figure out at all how he could have heard me. It's literally impossible. How did he know I was trying to predict he'd reach into his pocket for his phone? The only even remote possibility I can think of is that he has had the same observation as me, and thought I might be thinking the same thing, so just went for it. But realistically, what are even the chances of this?